The cold strung my face as I stood on my parents' front porch, one hand wrapped around the small gift bag I'd bought for my brother. Through the living room window, I could see the Christmas tree glowing. My father laughed at something on television. My mother carried a tray of food into the dining room. They were all inside. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. My phone rang. It was my mother. I smiled, thinking she was calling to tell me she'd finally heard the door. Instead, her voice came through calm, almost bored. Lilibet, don't come back. I frowned. Mom, I'm already here. I know. I looked toward the curtains. They shifted for a split second. Someone had seen me. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? She sighed as if I were making her evening difficult. Your brother doesn't want any scenes today. I blinked. What scenes? I haven't even walked inside. It's Christmas, she replied. We're not doing this tonight. I'm not trying to fight with anyone. I know, sweetheart. She paused. But Ethan's finally relaxed. Let's not ruin the day. The line went silent for a moment before she added the sentence that stayed with me for years. Just go home. Then she hung up. I stood there staring at my dark phone screen while laughter drifted through the windows of the house where I'd grown up. I waited another minute, convincing myself someone would open the door. Nobody did. The gift bag slowly slipped from my fingers onto the porch. I picked it back up, walked to my car and drove away without looking back. I had spent 3 hours on icy roads to be told I wasn't welcome in my own family home. The hardest part wasn't the drive. It wasn't even the rejection. It was realizing they'd made the decision before I ever arrived. No one had intended to let me in. Half an hour later, I found a small neighborhood cafe with a hand-painted sign that read open for Christmas dinner. The place was nearly full. Families laughed over steaming plates, while old holiday songs played softly through worn ceiling speakers. I chose the only empty table tucked into the corner, ordered the cheapest meal on the menu, and tried to focus on stirring my coffee instead of crying. The waitress smiled kindly but didn't ask questions. I appreciated that. Sometimes silence is the greatest kindness a stranger can offer. I had just taken my first bite when I heard an older woman's gentle voice. Sweetheart. I looked up. A grey-haired woman stood beside my table with a warm smile. Behind her sat a large family squeezed around 2 tables pushed together. Grandparents, adult children, spouses and grandchildren were all talking over one another. One chair remained empty. You shouldn't spend Christmas alone, she said. Would you honor us by joining our family? For a second I couldn't answer. These strangers had noticed me in less than 10 minutes. My own parents hadn't opened the door. I hesitated, embarrassed to intrude. I don't want to interrupt your holiday. Nonsense, the woman laughed. The best Christmas memories usually begin unexpectedly. Everyone at the table smiled and waved me over as though they'd been expecting me all evening. I picked up my plate and slowly crossed the room. As I sat in that empty chair, surrounded by people who didn't even know my last name, I thought they were simply giving one lonely woman somewhere to eat. I had no idea that accepting one empty chair would change the rest of my life. Christmas dinner with the Harper family felt strangely natural and painfully unfamiliar at the same time. I'm Margaret, the grandmother said as she passed me a basket of warm rolls, and around here everyone takes seconds whether they plan to or not. The table erupted with laughter. Her husband George winked. Don't argue, I've been losing that battle for 40 years. For the first time that day I laughed too. No one asked why I was alone. No one demanded an explanation. Instead, they asked about my favorite Christmas movie, whether I liked homemade pie, and if I had ever beaten anyone at their family's yearly card game. Before I realized it, I was arguing over card rules with their oldest son, while 2 little grandchildren insisted I was secretly cheating. It was wonderfully ordinary. When dinner ended, Margaret hugged me before I left. Next time, she said softly, Don't wait until Christmas to visit. I assumed she was only being polite. She wasn't. A week later she called to invite me to Sunday dinner. Then came another invitation. And another. When my birthday arrived 3 months later, flowers appeared outside my apartment with a handwritten note. Everyone deserves cake on their birthday. The Harpers. Meanwhile, I kept reaching toward the family I'd been born into. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I texted my father. No reply. I invited them to lunch for Mother's Day. We're busy, my mother answered hours later. Scrolling through social media that evening, I found pictures of them smiling together at a restaurant. Ethan was there. So were my parents. I wasn't. When I finally asked my mother why I always seemed to be the one left out, she sighed impatiently. Lilibet, we're just trying to keep the peace. I stared at the phone. Keeping the peace for who? She never answered. A few days later, Margaret placed another plate on her dining table before anyone arrived. Seeing my puzzled look, she smiled. Family isn't always who raises you, she said. Sometimes it's who refuses to let you eat alone twice. 6 years passed faster than I ever expected. Without anyone announcing it, the Harpers simply became part of my everyday life. When George needed knee surgery, I drove him to every appointment. When Margaret caught the flu one winter, I spent 3 evenings making soup and helping around the house. Nobody ever kept score. If someone needed help, everyone showed up. Christmases became loud, crowded, and wonderfully chaotic. Birthdays were never forgotten. Sunday dinners turned into a tradition I looked forward to more than any holiday I'd ever spent with my own parents. It was through one of those dinners that I met Daniel, the man who would become my fiancé. You must be Lilibet, he said, extending his hand. I've heard so much about you, I feel like I'm the new one. Margaret laughed. You are. By the time Daniel proposed, there was only one decision that kept me awake at night. Should I invite my parents? They're still your family, Daniel said gently. Whatever happens, you'll know you gave them the chance. So I mailed the invitations. To my surprise, they accepted. A week before the wedding, Margaret and George invited me over. George slid a neatly organized folder across the dining table. You don't have to open it if you're not ready, he said. Inside were court papers bearing my name. The adult adoption we'd quietly discussed months earlier had been finalized. Tears blurred the words as Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. This was never about replacing anyone, she whispered. We simply wanted our daughter to know she always had a home. I nodded through my tears. I've never doubted that. After the paperwork was complete, I legally took the Harper name. We agreed to keep it private until after the wedding. There was no announcement, no social media post, no attempt to embarrass anyone. But when the wedding programs arrived from the printer, I froze. For the first time in my life, my surname was no longer the one my parents believed it would be. The chapel buzzed with quiet conversation as guests found their seats. I stood just inside the bridal suite, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my dress while Margaret adjusted my veil. You ready? She asked. I looked at her reflection beside mine and smiled. I've been ready since the day you asked me to Christmas dinner. Her eyes glistened. George knocked gently before opening the door. They're all here, he said, including them. I knew exactly who he meant. Through the small window overlooking the entrance, I spotted my parents walking into the venue. My mother wore her favorite navy dress. My father scanned the room with the confidence of someone expecting to be treated as the bride's parents. Behind them walked Ethan. He looked uncomfortable. As they entered the reception hall before the ceremony, several guests greeted Margaret and George. So happy for your daughter, one woman said warmly. Margaret thanked her without hesitation. My mother's smile faded. She glanced toward my father. Did she just say, daughter? He shrugged. They probably mean it affectionately. The ceremony itself was everything Daniel and I had dreamed about. Simple, warm, filled with people who genuinely wanted us to be happy. After we exchanged vows, applause filled the room, followed by laughter and music as everyone moved into the reception hall. During dinner, George stood to give his toast. He raised his glass toward me. 6 years ago, one empty chair brought a remarkable young woman into our lives. The room quieted. There are moments when life surprises you with a gift you never expected. Watching our daughter find happiness today has been one of the greatest blessings Margaret and I have ever received. My parents froze. My mother slowly lowered her fork. Across the room, she leaned toward Ethan. "What is he talking about?" she whispered. Ethan frowned. "I don't know." A few minutes later, guests began signing the decorative marriage certificate displayed beside the guest book. My father wandered over, curious. Then he stopped moving. His eyes fixed on the names printed across the document. Bride, Lilibet Harper. He stared at it for several long seconds before calling my mother over. She looked once, then again. Her face drained of color. Before either of them could say a word, they found me standing near the dance floor. "What is this?" my mother demanded, holding the program in trembling hands. "Why does it say Harper?" I met her eyes calmly. "Because that's my name. You changed your name before today. I changed it when I finally found a family that never asked me to leave." My father's voice hardened. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone." I shook my head. "No, I didn't replace my family overnight." I glanced toward Margaret and George, who were laughing with Daniel's parents. "I simply accepted the people who never stopped choosing me." Silence settled between us. Then another voice cut through it. "Mom." We all turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, looking directly at our parents. His jaw tightened. "Dad." He swallowed hard. "I never asked you to keep her away that Christmas." The words hung in the air like the final note of a song no one wanted to hear. My mother stared at Ethan. "What are you talking about?" He took a slow breath. I complained that Christmas had been tense the year before. That's all I said. He looked at me, guilt written across his face. "I never asked you to tell Lilibet not to come home." My father immediately shook his head. "That's not how it happened." "It is," Ethan replied, his voice firmer now. "You said it would be easier if she stayed away for one holiday. You told me you'd handle it." He looked back at me. "I didn't know you were already driving to the house. I didn't know you were sitting outside while everyone was inside." I felt something inside me settle. For 6 years, I'd believed my brother had chosen a Christmas without me. Instead, my parents had chosen convenience over honesty. My mother reached for my hand. "Lilibet, we made a mistake." I stepped back. "It wasn't one mistake." She froze. "You forgot my birthdays. You declined every invitation. You answered my questions with, 'We're just trying to keep the peace.' Every time you had to choose between making Ethan uncomfortable and making me feel unwanted, you chose me to sacrifice." Neither of them could deny it. Margaret quietly walked over and stood beside me, not to interrupt but to support me. She looked at my parents with kindness rather than anger. "You can't reclaim years you willingly gave away," she said softly. "Love has to be practiced while you still have the chance." The room had fallen almost completely silent. No one was staring with curiosity anymore. They were witnessing the end of something that had been breaking for years. I turned toward the guests and lifted my glass. "I want to thank the people who taught me what family actually means." I smiled at Margaret and George. When I had nowhere to go, they gave me a chair at their table. They never asked me to earn my place. They never made me compete for their love. They simply kept inviting me back. Margaret wiped away tears. George reached over and squeezed her hand. Around the room, guests began applauding. Not loudly, just warmly. My parents stood in silence, realizing there was nothing left to explain. They quietly collected their coats and left before the first dance. Ethan didn't follow them. Instead, he walked over and hugged me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have asked more questions years ago." I hugged him back. I know our relationship wouldn't be repaired overnight, but for the first time in years, it was built on the truth instead of a lie. From that day forward, my parents stopped calling every holiday, hoping to pretend the past could be erased with one invitation. I wished them peace, but I no longer waited for their approval. Every Christmas after that was spent at the Harper home. The same dining room that had welcomed a lonely stranger now echoed with laughter from children, grandchildren, friends, and one daughter who had finally found where she belonged. Margaret still insisted on placing me in the very seat I had occupied that first Christmas. "It was never just an empty chair," she would say with a smile. "It was always yours." As I looked around that table each year, I understood something my younger self never could. The Christmas my parents told me not to come home, they thought they were taking away one holiday. They never realized they were giving me the family I'd spend the rest of my life with.